Hi, it's Tuesday, July the 13th. It's noontime and it's the Maine Take. Hi, my name is Dana Connors. I'm the president of State Chamber. It's my pleasure to be your host for this weekly program in which we talk about the plans, the projects, the people at work in our state, improving the lives as well as the livelihood of our people, and certainly improving our economy. And that's exactly what today's program is all about. We're going to begin with a discussion of the recent supplemental budget, part two, as I refer to it, that was passed just recently when the legislature met on June the 30th, which was our first veto day. We're going to talk about the importance of that supplemental budget, the value it brings to our people, why it deserves this special attention, and what it does and how it affects us. Very important. We're also going to follow that discussion by having Peter Van Allen from Mainebiz to be with us, as he normally is every week, but this time is on an expanded segment to talk about the presence and the impact of family-owned businesses in our state, an important and informative part as well. So we're going to begin today with our supplemental budget, and I think it's fair to say as we set this segment up that for most of us, particularly our guests today, it's been a long and challenging session. The pandemic, for good reason, set forth a process that we weren't accustomed to, one that didn't provide us that personal access that was so important in building relationships and trust. We also recognize that in the policy, there were a number of policies presented in the form of bills that if they had passed, the fact of the matter is they were progressive in nature. And if they'd have passed, many were concerned, including ourselves, about the impact it might have on an economy that was seeking to be in recovery. But that wasn't all. That certainly wasn't. The 8.3 Part 1 budget was passed in March, but we still had the supplemental budget, our focus for today, the one the governor presented to the Appropriations Committee some time ago, worth about $500 million worth of projects. But didn't end there either. You had the America's Rescue Plan that's under discussion this very day, which is how to spend the $1.1 billion received from the federal government to help us recover from the pandemic, as well as bond issues. So you can see as we introduce our guest, it was a daunting agenda, and certainly one to be reckoned with, one that had some real challenges, but also some real positive opportunities. And that's where we begin, because we are going to share with you the highlights of the supplemental Part 2 budget, those extra spending items, because they deserve attention and frankly praise, not only for what is within the supplemental budget, but how they arrived at the decisions they did. It was remarkable, very positive, and to both of our guests today, in advance, I offer my congratulations. They are, while our committee, Appropriations and Financial Affairs, has 13 members, we have two of the leaders on with us today. The Senate Chair from Falmouth and Gray is Cathy Breen, the Democratic Chair. Also from the House, the ranking Republican, Sawin Millett from Waterford. So I thank you both for being on. I know that you're in the process of meeting, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to be with me. So let's begin by, I don't want to undervalue or understate the work that you did in a session that in today's world is built more on divisiveness than it is consensus for sure, but you reached unanimous decision. And that paved the way for a 2/3 budget that would go into effect immediately and not have to wait for the traditional 90 days. That's an incredible success story. Tell us about the process to begin with, because that is important. Senator, you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Dana, so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with Representative Millett. I'm Cathy Breen, and I represent Senate District 25, 6.5 communities in Cumberland County. And I would say that it was challenging for several reasons, one of which was obvious in that we had to switch over like the rest of the world did, later than the rest of the world, but to remote operations. In addition, we had a very unusual revenue picture happening in the state where we had very low revenues at the beginning of the year, but revenues were beginning to pick up as each month went by. And then lastly, we had 13, out of the 13 people on our committee, 8 were brand new members of Appropriations. And that's a result of term limits. But having that many new members have to learn the process through remote operations, and having that very unusual revenue situation was a challenge for the 4 caucus leaders, for sure. But we did have a significant change package introduced in May from the governor's office. And there were some things in that I think formed some very good pillars, I would call, of the change package. Namely that we were going to finally reach 55% of general purpose aid to education, and that we were going to ramp back up over 2 years to full 5% revenue sharing. And in my opinion, those are really important pieces because we had a lot of obligations that had shifted over away from the state over to property taxpayers over the last decade. And I think this budget represents a shift back towards the state taking care of the state's obligations and shifting away from pressure on the property tax. And we did that without, of course, any income tax increases. We gave an increase across the board to the higher ed systems so that they are going to be able to keep tuition flat for this coming school year. And we also, as you mentioned, expanded some healthcare, in particular, expanded Maine Care coverage to preventive and diagnostic dental coverage, which is an enormous boon. As until this time, the only thing that a low-income person could get done would be an emergency extraction in the emergency room, which of course is very expensive and also leaves people then with really serious dental problems, which has serious health implications and really curtails their employment opportunities. So having access to preventive and diagnostic regular dental care will be a boon to individuals and people's health, but also will increase their employability over time, which I think is a really important dynamic. We did some other things after the governor's proposal came out. And I think in particular, we did some things with transportation and direct care workers, as well as direct payments to folks who were working through the pandemic. So maybe I'll let Representative Millett talk about some of those things that we did in transportation, rainy day fund, the direct payments to workers.
Yeah, Representative Millett, let me ask you the same question, both in terms of process, but also in terms of the product itself. I mean, having been aware of the fact and involved in the discussion that when the end of March and the Part 1 budget of $8.3 billion was approved by majority vote, it could have very easily set the stage, which I might quickly add was not the case. And instead of laboring on that, you came up with a unanimous package. And I think that's extremely commendable for a lot of reasons. Can you speak also to the process of how you came about at this time to a unanimous budget proposal, but also the elements of that package that were important to you and your party?
Sure. Thanks, Dana. And thanks to you, Senator Breen, for your opening comments, because you laid the groundwork very well. And I want to give credit to Cathy for her willingness to work together with my side of the aisle. We're the minority party. And I look at this as a major accomplishment at the very end of the game because we went through a lot of difficult hurdles, and she laid the groundwork for what happened in 2020 with the pandemic and us being out of the picture as a committee for much of the calendar year, coming in December, being sworn in with 8 new members of AFA committee and having a marginal growth in revenues at that point in time, and then having to work remotely for about 3.5 months where we really didn't get to know each other. We did have some notable successes in a supplemental budget on March 11th, which we got unanimous agreement and overwhelming support in a bipartisan way in covering the fiscal year 21 issues. And I know, Dana, you worked on many of those issues, tax conformity and so on. So that was a really good accomplishment, a good start. Later that month, we took a different approach to a baseline budget with a majority party vote without Republican votes or fingerprints. And at that point, I guess I would have been beginning to be more pessimistic and less trustworthy toward the process and the people than I normally would be. But thanks to Senator Breen and her co-chair from Falmouth, Senator Representative Peirce, I think we began to look at the revenue growth that came in on May 1, which, as you know, Dana and Cathy, produced $940 million of new growth over the 3-year period. More than half of it was in the fiscal 21 year, which we just closed out on 2 weeks ago, and the other half in the biennium. So it afforded us an opportunity to revisit a lot of things that weren't affordable when we came together in January and needed to be looked at anew. And the change package proposed to earmark all of that $940 million in one way or another. And it was really an approach that took 3 different strategies. One, to what we would call transfer or park 315 million of those monies, particularly the one-time FY21 pieces, appropriate 433 million, and then use tax relief for 174 million. So with that blueprint, we began working after the change package was heard, and we had committee involvement, obviously, on the policy side. And we began starting to talk seriously in late May about priorities. And priorities for us were, and Senator Breen has talked about them, tax relief. We wanted to build on the relief that we gave in the supplemental to those who unfortunately were laid off during the pandemic year by acknowledging that many other people kept the economy afloat during 2020 and early 21 by working, many of them under duress, many of them in the healthcare world. And we wanted to make sure that their contribution to a recovering economy was addressed. That became a Republican priority, and Senator Breen referenced it generally. We ended up with a $150 million earmark that will result in 500,000 people receiving a check of approximately $300 if they were a year-round resident during 2020, filed an income tax return, and were not considered a dependent on someone else's return. So that's a landmark piece for my side of the aisle, and I think it became a bipartisan one in the process of negotiation. The other pillar, if I could use that term in a broader sense, again, not to duplicate Senator Breen's comments, but we actually came together on over 500 million of tax relief in the final package. Taking that 150 million for tax relief payments that I mentioned, the revenue sharing getting back to 4.5 in the first year and 5% in the second year, consumed another 100 million. The general purpose aid getting to 55% in both years turned out to be 187 million. And we used all of that along with another 74 million of tax relief out of the policy committee. And the elements there, Dana, you're well aware, included conforming to 2 new pieces, earned income tax credit and child care credits that were enacted as part of the federal initiative. Plus, we made more generous the property tax fairness credit, and we exempted the sales tax on menstrual products. So over 500 million became a large chunk of the final product that I would call tax relief. But the other pillars that I'll just supplement what Senator Breen mentioned, in the area of nursing facility and other long-term care and direct care workers, working together, we put together 2 different initiatives that had $20 million plus of general fund money to address that broad spectrum of people that were impacted at the provider level, at the worker level, and in terms of the income that those critical direct care people were earning and will earn in a much improved way going forward. That $40 million that was addressed to those 2 areas will generate more than $200 million in total adjustments to the provider community and to the direct care worker community. So those are a couple of the highlights. Building upon that and the improved revenue picture, not only in the forecast, but as we got into late May, we began to look at the cascade, which is a year-end budget year closing process of distributing monies that exceeded the revenue forecast in place at the time and included any unspent general fund appropriations. When we saw that number tracking upward, we saw an opportunity to look at the governor's bond bill proposal, which had $40 million for Land for Maine's Future, and find a way to put those $40 million into the budget itself. 20 million went into the spending side and 20 million into the cascade. We saw a way to take care of another 5 million through the budget process, and that left us with just 100 million for roads and bridges. So in your former department, Dana, we wanted to make darn sure that the projects that improve roads and bridges and our multimedia facilities were in place for both the contract year we're now in and fiscal 22 or calendar year 22 when those projects will continue. So we found a way, and it was not easy, with a $100 million bond that would go to the voters in November for next year's projects to put 50 million into the cascade this year on the assumption that if the federal monies that we'll be working on today, these so-called ARP monies, don't allow us to use 50 that was put in the governor's ARP bill for roads and bridges, that we at least have a backstop. And we're going to talk more today about the fact that the backstop looks better than the proposal, because if it's there and it seems to be working its way toward being a realistic assumption that 50 million will be available, it will attract the federal match, which, as you know, Dana, is more like 2.5 to 1.
Yeah.
So we accomplished that within the cascade. We get down to a point where we've done a lot of things that both parties agreed to. We covered $8 million of table bills at the end by allotting $2 million per caucus. And we stayed within the Republican goal of not appropriating more than $8.5 billion for the biennium that we're now just beginning. That's the summary that I would look at. But again, I would say in full assumption of the give and take, this was a bipartisan product, and it will, I think, address the priorities without building a huge out-year baseline dollar amount, and it will take us into January where we can make other adjustments as needed. So I'm very proud of it. I think it's an accomplishment that could not have been done without a willingness to put aside partisan differences and work together in a bipartisan way. We were helped, I would say, and Cathy, feel free to jump in on this, because it was somewhat irritating, but it was therapeutically helpful to have the presiding officers and our chairs and leads and our minority leaders in the speaker's office on the Thursday before we closed it out on Sunday to tell us, you go back downstairs and you do the work and you stay within these guidelines and we can take it to 2/3. We did it. And I think the rank and file appreciated the fact that we did the heavy lifting. There was not a single amendment addressed in a serious manner on the floor, and we got overwhelming votes. So overall, I would say, stepping back, one of the better accomplishments of the biennium to date. And I credit my members, my leaders, as well as those on the other side of the aisle for getting us to that point.
And clearly, we credit both of you as well as the committee. I mean, it all begins with leadership, and clearly the state is extremely fortunate that we have the two of you in the positions that you're in on appropriations. It really matters. It really makes a difference. And the proof is in the pudding, as we say. I mean, this program was really intended to put a spotlight on both the process, which was remarkable given the day and the time that this state and this country is in, to find that discussion and debate can lead to something besides divisiveness, and clearly something as important as what we have heard from the two of you today. And if I could take this, replicate it throughout the state so that people would hear what you have to say and better understand the success that came from your hard work, the state would be so much better off. And we all recognize that consumer confidence is such a leading indicator of success in the economy. What you had to say and the program that you spoke of is a very strong statement of consumer confidence, and everybody should hear it and everybody should know about it. And I've used up your time, and I thank you very, very much for both of you for what you have accomplished, but for being on this show to share it with as many people as we can possibly share it with. Thank you. And good
Dana,
luck.
could I make one closing comment that I know is a priority? I just want to make sure folks understand that we also will be putting a historically high amount into the rainy day fund. So we are not on a spending spree. We are making strategic investments, but we are also doing what any responsible business and parties would do, which is increasing our rainy day fund in the event that we have something we never saw coming, like the pandemic. So
Yep.
We've done a lot of strategic investments, but we've also set aside for a rainy day. So I wanted to make sure everybody understood that clearly.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention and reminding of it. And again, even though it's sometimes an overused word, I mean it sincerely. Thank you so much and congratulations. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Take
Thank you.
care. Now let's turn our attention to an issue that I confess we're all pretty well aware in this state of how important small business is. Let me correct that. We're aware of and appreciate all businesses regardless of size, but we know that in the state of Maine, we are principally a small business state. We know that the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well, and that 80% of our businesses employ fewer than 20 people. But I wonder how many of us really understood until the edition of Mainebiz came out on June the 28th and reminded us of not just how important they are, which they clearly are, but that 80% of our businesses are family-owned businesses. I found that remarkable. And this particular edition that I'm speaking of, I wish I had to cover it with me to show you, is one that you want to really look at and study, because Mainebiz did an incredible job of bringing to our attention the importance, the impact, and the issues, the trends that and challenges that the family-owned business faces today. And who better to discuss that with us than the editor of Mainebiz, Peter Van Allen, who is with us on a regular basis to bring us good news. And today, especially good news, but an extended session. Peter, thanks for being on the show again today and for this incredible edition of Mainebiz in which you dedicated it to the family-owned business. Thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Dana. I appreciate that. So here is the cover. This is
There you go.
With Joanne Lance from Geiger.
Yep.
In Lewiston. So Dana, I thought I was surprised by those figures as you were, and when you look at the 80% of businesses are family owned, and we all know in Maine that small business is a huge part of our business here, but 64% of the U.S. GDP is from family owned businesses. 60% of the U.S. workforce is family owned businesses. And in Maine, we also in that edition ran a top 10 of the family-owned businesses. And just for fun, I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through. I mean, LL, you go shopping for clothes or a jacket or that kind of thing, and you're going to LL Bean or Rennie's. They're both family-owned. You're going out to CN Brown owns the Big Apple convenience store. So you go out and get a Snickers bar. That's a family-owned business. The company that delivers those products to Big Apple is Pine State Trading, which is family-owned. They're based in Gardner. You go to the lumber yard, Hancock and Hammond Lumber are the two biggest lumber yards in Maine. They're family-owned,
Yep.
as is Eldridge Lumber. You go to buy a car, Lee Auto, family-owned. They're among Maine's top 10 businesses. You see where I'm going with this. You go to a stadium, You're sitting on a seat manufactured by Huzzy Seating in North Berwick. They're family-owned. So they are very much a part of the fabric in Maine. I think that's a great point that you raised.
Yeah, I also wanted to, Mark has a slide that I wanted to put up that touched upon a couple of points, but I was also struck by how women have really been a major factor in the family home business. And here's a slide. Do you want to share that, Peter? Because I think hopefully you can see it.
Yeah,
it not only speaks to the impact on our gross domestic product and other features, but there's three points here about the standing of women and the importance in the family-owned business.
Yeah, we compiled some statistics on women. So you have up here in the past 5 years, women-owned family businesses have increased by 37%. This is data from the Conway Center for Family Business. About a quarter of all family businesses are led by a female CEO or president. About a third, the successor who's been named is a woman. About 60% or almost 2/3 of family-owned businesses have a woman in a top management position, and it's really that it's becoming a bigger factor. The aspect of women and their role in the family business.
So let me ask you this. I mean, there was another statistic too that I found that went along with that lack of understanding, perhaps, in that they play that the family-owned business plays such a dominant place. 80% of our businesses are family-owned, and 78% of new jobs are created by the family-owned business. I wonder how many of us really understand and appreciate that, because to me, that also speaks to we use the word, I'm going to reuse it again because I think it's perfect, the fabric of Maine. What makes Maine so special? It's family, and family is always special, but it also extends into the community, because those people that are part of a family-owned business have a real connection with community. And when you think about that, that's kind of what Maine is known for, is that sensitivity to one another. The pandemic showed it in spades, that we work together, we're very resilient, we face the odds. And again, I can't say enough good about that particular edition and how it brings to our attention what Maine is really all about. Great job.
Yeah, they're job creators. I mean, again, when you look at the top 10 in Maine, I mean, we talked about LL Bean, and they have over 3,000 employees in Maine. But here's a company, and we've talked about this one on the show in the past, but Puritan Medical Products, they make the swabs that are used in COVID tests. Now they have scaled back a bit, but they have about 1,400 employees in Maine, and they've opened 2 new factories. They now have 3 factories in Maine, and they're opening a factory in Tennessee. So they're definitely creating jobs. They're on that, and back to your point of creating jobs, they're definitely creating jobs here.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable. There's so much. I mean, I wish I had another 20 minutes to talk with you about this fact, because it's not only kind of heartwarming, not to get into that emotional part of it, but economically it's so strong. And when you think about what this brings to our attention and what our 2 representatives brought to our attention about at a time in this country when it's all about I'm right, you're wrong, divisiveness, and they actually work together to produce a product that's as significant as the supplemental budget, boy, that speaks to something very special that's in the air in this state. And it leads to that consumer confidence that's so important in a successful economy. Well, Peter, you're always wonderful. Pardon me, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, to that point, I mean, I think people do connect with family-owned businesses, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it could be the mom and pop or the coffee shop, but I think even, people like the fact that, when they go to an LL Bean or they're buying wild Maine blueberries, they're buying it from a Maine company, from Wyman's, and
Yeah.
I think that people do connect on that level. I think it's important.
Oh, I agree. I think you're absolutely 100% correct on that. And unfortunately, I've got to wrap it up, but I look forward to having you back on. Actually, we're going to be going every other week. So the next one will be on the 27th, only because it's summertime in Maine, and we know how we all want to get out and enjoy it. So
Enjoy your
we'll have you back as always, and look forward to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, as we draw this program to a close for the next 2 weeks, boy, I was struck by our guests today and the messages that they brought to our attention. And clearly, the takeaway is that they all gave us reason to celebrate. They gave us cause to show appreciation, to offer congratulations to the people and their work, to those on appropriation, to our family-owned businesses in our state, for, in both instances, what they are doing to serve our economy, and for their contributions to our lives as well as our livelihood. It's true. It's been a session like few others. I could actually say like none other, because of when you consider the impact that the pandemic had on how we provided information, how we had access or lack thereof to the legislature. That was a challenge. But the pandemic also affected arguably some of the policy issues that we ended up dealing with. And the very fact that had some of them and a number of them that were of the progressive side, how they could have stood in the way, impeded progress, when at a time when we wanted to have our economy and be in a state of recovery, which we have seen, notwithstanding some challenges, but we've certainly witnessed to that progress. Well, that is clearly the case, but the pandemic has also brought to our attention the fact that we have before us that they're dealing with right today, the $1.1 billion of America's rescue dollars given to us to help strengthen and grow our economy. And as you heard today, the supplemental budget should be heralded both for the way it was developed, that bipartisan approach, that unanimous result that paved the way for 2/3 implementation of those many projects and programs that we just heard about. Yeah, that was incredible. And they did that in a way that we should all be celebrating. It's and certainly, as we have seen with the family-owned business, what a wonderful story to be able to share with people. They represent 80% of our businesses in the state of Maine. 76% of growth and jobs come from family-owned business. They are the fabric of our state. They, to a large degree, express that quality of life that we are so proud of. And we should be proud of our family-owned businesses and all that they do for the state. Yeah, the session was one that it's easy to focus on the challenges, the problems, but it's important that we not forget the positive, the opportunities. It's probably gives truth to the meaning that sometimes the enemy of good is perfect, but not bad. Well, perhaps the session wasn't perfect in every sense of the word, but as we have seen today, there was a lot of good that has come out of this particular session. So I extend my thanks to the Appropriations Committee for showing us, or shining the light, I guess I would more appropriately say, on the good, for both the way they did it, but also the results they obtained. And certainly thanks to our family-owned businesses who bring to our state and our economy the very fabric our state is known and recognized for. That entrepreneurial spirit, that pride, that sense of community. Oh, that's all so very special, and we are so very lucky. I believe it's fair to say that, as we've heard today on this program, there are some amazing things going on around us in our state. If only we stop for just a moment to take notice of what those are. Well, today we do, but that also has to be followed by one last expression, and that is one of appreciation. And that we do as well. So I thank you for being with us once again. We're going to see you in 2 weeks on the 27th. I hope that we'll be able to have the governor on to talk about the legislative session in retrospect. But in the meantime, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. Be kind to yourself, but be kind to one another. In 2 weeks, I hope to see you right back here. Same time, same place. Have a great couple weeks. Take care.